The concept of humanitarian intervention is often presented as a moral imperative, a responsibility of powerful nations to protect vulnerable populations from atrocities. This notion, enshrined in the United Nations Responsibility to Protect doctrine, suggests that sovereignty is not absolute and that military force can be justified on humanitarian grounds. However, Noam Chomsky, in his incisive work, A New Generation Draws the Line, challenges this narrative, arguing that it serves as a smokescreen for imperial ambitions and masks the West's own history of violence. Chomsky contends that the responsibility to protect is selectively applied, often invoked to justify interventions that align with Western interests, while ignoring atrocities committed by allies or those deemed strategically insignificant. He argues that the very notion of a humanitarian intervention is inherently contradictory, as military force inevitably results in civilian casualties and rarely achieves its stated objectives. Instead of promoting peace and stability, Chomsky posits, interventions often exacerbate existing conflicts and create power vacuums that breed further instability. Chomsky's critique of humanitarian intervention is rooted in his broader analysis of US foreign policy, which he views as driven by a relentless pursuit of global hegemony. From the Vietnam War to the invasion of Iraq, Chomsky meticulously documents a pattern of US military interventionism that has resulted in widespread death, displacement, and instability. Chomsky's central argument in A New Generation Draws the Line revolves around the inherent hypocrisy of the United States foreign policy. He posits that while the US presents itself as a beacon of freedom, its actions tell a different story. Chomsky documents a long history of US interventions in the global South, often under the pretense of humanitarianism. He argues these actions are driven by a desire to maintain US dominance and secure resources. Chomsky points to the overthrow of governments in Iran, Guatemala, and Chile as evidence. These interventions, he argues, were about installing regimes favorable to US interests. Furthermore, Chomsky argues that the US has supported brutal dictators when it suited its interests. This selective moral outrage exposes the hollowness of US claims to be a force for good. He sees the war on terror and interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan as part of this pattern. Chomsky argues that the media plays a crucial role in shaping public perception of international events, often acting as a mouthpiece for powerful interests. He contends that mainstream media outlets, far from providing objective and impartial reporting, often serve to legitimize and manufacture consent for US foreign policy, even when it involves military intervention. He outlines a propaganda model of media, arguing that news coverage is heavily influenced by factors such as corporate ownership, advertising revenue, and reliance on government sources. These factors, Chomsky argues, create a system where dissenting voices are marginalized and information that challenges the dominant narrative is suppressed. Chomsky points to the media coverage of the 2003 invasion of Iraq as a prime example of this phenomenon. He argues that the mainstream media largely uncritically accepted and amplified the Bush administration's claims about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, despite the lack of credible evidence. This, he argues, played a key role in swaying public opinion in favor of the war. A New Generation Draws the Line is not merely a theoretical critique of humanitarian intervention. It is grounded in a rigorous examination of specific historical and contemporary examples. Chomsky dissects various cases of US intervention, meticulously documenting the human cost and the geopolitical motivations behind them. He revisits the Vietnam War, exposing the devastating consequences of US intervention and the flawed assumptions that underpinned it. Chomsky argues that the war, far from being a noble effort to contain communism, was driven by a desire to maintain US dominance in Southeast Asia. He highlights the horrific civilian casualties inflicted by US bombing campaigns and the long-term environmental damage caused by Agent Orange. Chomsky also examines more recent interventions, such as the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. He documents the devastating consequences of the invasion, including the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians and the destabilization of the entire region. Section 5. The illusion of benevolence, unmasking humanitarian intervention. Chomsky's central thesis in A New Generation Draws the Line is that the concept of humanitarian intervention is often a smokescreen for imperial ambitions. He argues that powerful states, particularly the United States, frequently use the language of human rights and democracy promotion to justify military actions that serve their own strategic and economic interests. He challenges the notion that military force can be a tool for good, arguing that interventions inevitably result in civilian casualties and often exacerbate existing conflicts. Chomsky points to the example of the NATO intervention in Libya in 2011, which, while initially presented as a success story for humanitarian intervention, ultimately led to the collapse of the Libyan state and the rise of competing militias, plunging the country into chaos. Chomsky argues that the very language of humanitarian intervention is problematic, as it implies a benevolent paternalism that masks the power dynamics at play. He contends that interventions are rarely driven by altruistic motives, but rather by a desire to maintain or expand spheres of influence, secure access to resources, or eliminate perceived threats. Section 6. Challenging power. Chomsky's call to action. Chomsky's work is not merely a critique of power, but a call to action. He firmly believes in the power of informed citizens to challenge the actions of their governments and hold them accountable for their foreign policy decisions. He argues that the first step towards a more just and peaceful world is to break free from the propaganda and misinformation that often surrounds discussions of international affairs. Chomsky encourages readers to engage in critical thinking, to question the narratives presented by those in power, and to seek out alternative sources of information. He stresses the importance of independent media and grassroots activism in holding governments accountable and challenging the status quo. He also emphasizes the importance of international solidarity and cooperation in addressing global challenges. Chomsky believes that by working together, people across borders can create a more just and equitable world. Section 7. The future of global humanitarian efforts. Chomsky's analysis of humanitarian intervention raises important questions about the future of global efforts to address human suffering. If military intervention is often counterproductive and driven by ulterior motives, what alternatives exist? Chomsky argues for a paradigm shift in international relations, one that prioritizes diplomacy, conflict prevention, and addressing the root causes of conflict. He believes that a more just and peaceful world requires tackling issues such as poverty, inequality, and political oppression. Chomsky advocates for strengthening international institutions, promoting sustainable development, and fostering intercultural dialogue to address the underlying causes of conflict and instability. Chomsky also emphasizes the importance of empowering local communities and supporting grassroots movements working for peace and justice. Section 8. Chomsky's enduring legacy. Noam Chomsky's A New Generation Draws the Line stands as a significant contribution to the ongoing debate surrounding humanitarian intervention and the role of the United States in the world. Chomsky's work, characterized by its meticulous research, sharp analysis, and unwavering commitment to social justice, continues to challenge conventional wisdom and inspire critical thinking about international affairs. His critique of US foreign policy, rooted in a deep understanding of history and power dynamics, provides a valuable counter-narrative to the dominant narratives often presented by governments and mainstream media. Chomsky's work serves as a constant reminder of the importance of questioning authority, challenging the status quo, and holding those in power accountable for their actions. He's been a tireless advocate for social justice, peace, and human rights, inspiring generations of activists and scholars with his unwavering commitment to speaking truth to power. His work continues to be relevant in today's world, where issues of war, intervention, and global inequality remain pressing concerns. Section 9. A final word. Hope in the Face of Empire, A New Generation Draws the Line is a challenging and often unsettling read. Chomsky's unflinching critique of US foreign policy and the hypocrisy of humanitarian intervention can leave readers feeling disillusioned and powerless. However, amidst the bleak realities he exposes, Chomsky offers a glimmer of hope. He firmly believes in the power of informed citizens to challenge the actions of their governments and create a more just and peaceful world. Chomsky encourages readers to engage in critical thinking, to question the narratives presented by those in power, and to seek out alternative sources of information. He also emphasizes the importance of international solidarity and cooperation in addressing global challenges. Chomsky's message is ultimately one of hope and empowerment.